Hi everyone, Ring-Thing Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Deradoorian record, Expanding Flower Planet. Angel Deradoorian is a singer-songwriter, mostly a singer known for the incredible vocals that she has lent to many a Dirty Projectors record, the indie and experimental rock and pop act whose music you should familiarize yourself with if you don't know who they is. But she's actually lent guest vocals to a lot of other people's songs and records too. You might have caught her on a Roots record or the latest Flying Lotus record. And she also dropped a solo EP in 2009, although I actually didn't hear that EP and I'm not really too familiar with the music on it. However, I didn't really want to dive too deeply into it before I did this review because I didn't want to go into this album with too many expectations. Plus, it's also been 6 years since the release of that EP, and I wasn't going to go into this album assuming that she wanted to do the exact same thing on this record that she was doing on that EP. It's been so long. There were some tracks building up to the release of this album that I thought sounded really great, had me looking forward to reviewing it, but I'm not reviewing this record alone. I have actually invited Mr. Mark Grondin of Spectrum Pulse, another YouTube music reviewer, fellow music critic man, on to talk about this album with me, and that's essentially what we're going to do together.
Transition, and here we are through the magic of the internet with Mr. Mark Grondin, aka Spectrum Pulse, talking about this new Deradoorian record with me. Mark, what did you think of this record?
Honestly, going in, I did not have high expectations, but I was pleasantly surprised. I actually found more to like about this album than I had otherwise expected.
What was it that sort of made you go into this record and not sort of expect a whole lot?
Well, part of it is that I've never really been a huge Dirty Projectors fan. I mean, I liked a lot of her work that she had. I liked her voice. I thought she had a very distinctive presence behind her. I have always had issues with the way the Dirty Projectors wrote songs, though, and that kind of had me a little bit averse to it. I remember taking a look at the EP that she dropped before Bit Orca, and I thought it was good, but it was overshadowed by Bit Orca. I also heard the stuff that she did with Avery Terre on the Slash Effect stuff, and again, it was okay, but I didn't have a lot of expectations going into a full-out solo record, whether or not she'd be able to carry it on her own. What about you?
I didn't go into it expecting a whole lot either, but mostly because, and I am a Dirty Projectors fan, at least a fan of a few of their records. There are some records of theirs that I don't really care for too much. But I feel like the role of Angel, really just the role of David, sort of seems to be maybe overemphasized a little bit in the creative process of the Dirty Projectors. So I think your average fan of that band isn't necessarily looking for solo material or necessarily thinking of people in Angel in the group as like, playing this really super creative role. And while I don't think this sounds like a Dirty Projectors album, I think this album certainly sheds light onto some of the ideas that turn up in their records that I think are really good. I guess I do think in a sense that this does kind of feel like, I don't know, what you would expect out of a somewhat indulgent solo project or side project. Yeah. Like you were saying, you do kind of have issues with the way that Dirty Projectors write songs. I wouldn't exactly say that Angel is the sharpest songwriter. I don't really think she's trying to write, really sharp, straightforward, succinct pop type songs on this record, though. Mm-hmm. The tracks kind of seem to have a bit of a psychedelic and meditative appeal with a lot of groovy repetitions that really kind of take their time, and you've got to kind of, I don't know, really let go of yourself and your expectations a little bit to kind of get lost in the instrumentals and kind of the very hypnotic instrumentation she's pulling together here.
I would mostly agree with you there, at least in starting off on the way this record goes, because that's when I first started to enjoy it, is when I started to, this is definitely one that grew on me with time, when you had more of the instrumentation that was a little bit more, it allowed itself to get a little bit looser, allowed itself to build itself to a little bit more energy. They had some spots that were a little bit, she initially described this as being very krautrock inspired, particularly by Can.
Sure.
And you can definitely hear it in some of the progressions in terms of some of the minimalism that she was going specifically for. especially with some of the more bass heavy tracks that she used to flood out the boss. She used to provide a foundation, but not giving a lot of texture to that foundation, more relying on some very crisp drums that I actually found really quite good. Sometimes some of the kick drums did kind of bug me a little. But when you go to a track like Komodo, for instance, that was the one that really first jumped out at me, where you had some, what did I think about? Like, that was one of those tracks that felt, it was the most ethereal that she had gotten to that point, and it had that creaking, weedy organ to flesh it out. It had that stalking menace in the background. I thought that really came together well. The outro, yes, did go on a little bit long, but I really liked how her voice was multi-tracked on that song. It really came together well, and particularly how her progression on that she was singing across the bridge was then mirrored by that mandolin. Just sounded really good.
Yeah, Komodo was definitely a track that I kind of listed as one of my favorites on here too. And it was also, not just because of that really great instrumentation that you mentioned, but I thought songwriting-wise and vocally it was one of the bolder tracks on the entire album. A lot of these songs where I feel like she tends to step back a little vocally and just kind of let the instrumentation, sort of engage in those krautrock-like repetitions. Did kind of lose themselves on me as she kind of delivered one track after another track after another track in that style. And I think it kind of caused the album to lose steam a little bit. Also the song Violent Minded, and maybe one of my favorite moments on the entire record was like the least krautrock-ish, and that was like the acoustic ballad at the start of Grow. I thought her lyrics at that point of the record were really great, and I thought just hearing her kind of sing in this very straightforward singer-songwriter type manner was really cool and refreshing. And on Komodo, I really liked and on the second half of Grow too, I liked the sort of really cool, nimble vocal acrobatics with those multi-tracks that you usually hear on a Dirty Projectors record, but I feel like in the solo capacity, she was able to indulge in that a little bit more and came out with some really cool experiments, and I guess you could say like vocal backflips that I feel like she wouldn't have necessarily done if she was, trying to fit into a more succinct song. Kind of the linear song structures on this record kind of allowed her to give the melodic passages here that she was writing a lot of space to kind of, progress and, move forward.
See, I would agree with you for some point, except the thing is, I really didn't like Grow all that much. It feels to me like it had that lo-fi, mournful acoustic guitar. I liked her writing of a lot of that song. It did come together to a point. I think the questions that it raises kind of run thematically counter to the rest of the album. I'll get back to that. But to me, that song always felt, I don't think the transition handled all that well. And the mean between that more lo-fi
transition
side.
was a little, I get clunky. It just seemed really sudden and just really out of the blue. While I thought the acoustic intro of Grow was really great, maybe if she had thought of a way to just kind of really finish out that song and have it sound fantastic, this sudden transition into this insane little instrumental passage wouldn't have been necessary.
And I liked some of the flutes that she brought in. I think all the components were there to make that song work. I just don't think they came together as well as they could. Now, the one song that caught me off guard a lot was the Eye. Just because it starts off, you don't really expect it to develop such a fast-paced groove on that song with just the fragments of whooshing vocals going on, a very minimalist tapping melody. And it's the first song that builds to a solid crescendo for me. And I'm like, this is a song that actually has some pop appeal. And I liked the way it fit thematically with the rest of the album, and that she's finally reached that moment of transcendence. It's almost a little bit terrifying in its frenetic intensity. But it's all, in my opinion, it's like when you have when you have that bass line, when you have that multi-tracking that just interwove together so well, it really clicked to me. Probably my favorite track on the album.
What to you is sort of the theme of this album? You're talking about certain points of the record sort of working against what this record is doing thematically. While I do think there are some strong repetitious characteristics of a lot of these tracks, and very meditative, very psychedelic, like I said.
Yeah.
Still, to me, the record on the whole felt a little bit like, bit of a loose change kind of thing. It kind of felt like some just quiet personal indulgences rather than just like a very well groomed and well put together record that is just like very fluid from beginning to end. I mean, as much as I like tracks like Grow, I'm not really in love with that song from the standpoint of an outro, you know. It just seems like so clunky of a song to just kind of finish off the whole record.
And I would agree with you there. I think thematically she's trying to, in some of the lyrics, and provided you can make out the lyrics, like as much as I think the multi-tracking is very harmonious and has that meditative element that does sound really beautiful, the lyrics are not posted anywhere for this album online. So trying to decode it required about 8 or 9 listens for me to really unpack what she was saying. A lot of it is symbolically exploring the oneness. A lot of it is tying back into very basic Eastern-inspired psychedelic themes that honestly, the writing doesn't do enough to really flesh out. And I like that she's trying to search for that transcendence, that oneness, that when you have songs like the opening track, which is very much a beautiful woman, how she wants to aspire to get to that point. And it seems like most of this record was building to that aspiration. And then you have Grow at the very end where she's asking the question, how can you get there? Where she's asking, it seems like very much where this album was implying you're smarter than you let on. That is when on the title track, she implies that you have more knowledge. You just need to unpack it within your own mind. And yet it seems at the very end of the album, she has not figured it out for herself, which I think it's an interesting contradiction that you can see brought forward, where she struggles with her own vices, where she struggles with her own being able to see that higher form of transcendence. That's why The Invisible Man was probably my second favorite song, just because it had that better, more punchy drums to it. It had that great turgid swell that built up with these sparse minimalistic flutters. But it's also that she's asking the question, if I could see this invisible man, what would I see? Would it terrify me? Or if I'm seeing through it, what does that mean? Is there really just no substance there? And I think that the comment there, I think in terms of those, whether that invisible man is the own creatures that are haunting her own personal psychoses, whether or not she's giving them body by looking at them, for instance, or whether or not whether or not it's better to have them unseen or seen, for instance. So
I think that's maybe one of the things that the record, the more I listened to it, the more I was just kind of, I don't know, put off by it a little bit. It seemed like kind of like the idea of Eastern New Age thought sort of, you know, put through this kind of Western lens. You know, somebody who grew up in the West and grew up in, you know, kind of like just a more, I guess you would just say a more Western environment, and you know, trying to kind of chase that dragon of transcendence, and maybe kind of going about it in a really obvious way, not only with tracks like Your Creator, but also, you know, the Onias track, which you know, I think was trying to I think was trying to embody the idea of like this meditative spirit, but only ended up kind of creating like a bit of a I guess just a really weak pastiche of it.
I think that Onias easily one of the weakest songs on the album. It doesn't flow well. She sounds like she was trying to go for that transcendent moment, but especially during that interlude, which she had that wow sound effect, it felt really clumsy, did not particularly work that well. But this is an album that I think, even though it's striving to try to find that transcendence, and it's not really getting there. And it doesn't have that looseness, that more organic feel to get there, considering how stiff a lot of these beats feel to me. I'd argue that, sure, she might be aware of it, but still it doesn't redeem it.
I guess it's a little frustrating because, you know, while I think some of the way the instrumentation locks it together into this record to create these grooves, it could be a little bit more tense. It could create this sense of progression a little bit better, so that as you're moving through the song, you feel like you're kind of going from point A to point B. But still, on top of this instrumentation, there are some wonderful moments. Sometimes her vocal layering is really great and really sharp. Sometimes her lyrics are great. Sometimes, like on the song Invisible Man, that keyboard solo on that track is really fantastic, really playful, really cool. But again, I don't get caught up in sort of the drums and the bass and the guitars kind of playing in this rhythmic fashion together, like I would want to.
And I would agree with you there. I think that a lot of it is trying to go for more of that drum circle feel, but doesn't have the organic vibe and the organic fire that would come with one of these drum circle feels. A lot of this album feels very cold to me. It doesn't have that. It doesn't have that same sort of warmth that you would expect out of some of the guitars. It doesn't even have that
communal music.
Exactly.
It feels like communal music trying to be created through the mind of one person.
Yes. Sort of. And I would agree with you there. I think that a lot of I think that they have moments where she's trying to incorporate that communal feel by bringing in the multi-track vocals, which are very pretty and it sound very, very good. But at the same time, when it sounds so stiff on the lower end, or you don't have any bass line with any sort of texture to it, it's hard for me to go back to this in the same way, especially when the songwriting is pretty lightweight.
Yeah. All right, I think we can leave it there. Overall, I mean, I like this record for its experimentation, its indulgence. I think it's got a lot of pretty sounds on it, and I like that it's, a little bit out there, but I think it just doesn't deliver on just all of the promise that, you would get from a singer this good, from, the sort of instrumentals that are trying to, ride the fringe a little bit like this. And with a record that has, a handful of really solid songs that kind of built up to the release, I'm feeling I think a light to decent 6 on this one.
I think I liked it a little bit more in terms of being able to get sucked into the vibe of some of these songs. I think that a lot of them do come together more often than they don't. I like some of the more frenetic krautrock inspired ones like The Eye or The Invisible Man. And I think there are fragments of idea that Deradoorian brings to the table that I'd love to see develop more. But the problem is we don't get that additional development. And thus, I'm thinking probably a light 7 for me. And even that feels a little generous.
All right, Mark, thanks for coming on and talking with me about this record.
That was fun.
I will leave a link to Mark's channel down in the description box so you guys can check out his reviews and check out his channel as well. And I mean, he's probably going to be on this channel again someday talking with me about some other shit.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on, Anthony. I really appreciate this.
All right. Have a good one, dude.
All right. Later.
Anthony Fantano, Spectrum Pulse, Angel Deradoorian, forever.